I was supposed to be getting married. That was the plan. The invitations had been sent, the venue booked, and the excitement was real. For years, I believed that Sarah was my person. We had built a life together, bought a house, planned a future, talked about kids. I trusted her, completely. Then one night she got out of bed, put on her coat and left. She didn't make excuses. She didn't pretend. She came back a couple of hours later and told me exactly where she had been. Who she had been with. His name is Jake, a mutual friend, someone who had been in our home, sat at our table, laughed with us. Someone I never once saw as a threat because, why would I? Sarah and I were solid. Or so I thought. I don't remember what I said. I don't remember much about that night at all except for the overwhelming sensation of something inside me breaking, something fundamental, something I would never get back. The next few days were chaos. Calls had to be made. Deposits were lost. My family, her family, our friends. Everyone had questions, concerns, opinions. I didn't have the energy to answer any of them. All I knew was that the wedding was off, and my life as I knew it had collapsed. Sarah moved out. She went to stay with her stepmother just a few miles away. Our house, the one we had bought together less than 2 years ago, had to be sold. Another painful, complicated process. People told me I was handling it well, that I was mature, rational. They didn't know that every second felt like drowning, that my mind kept replaying that night over and over again, twisting every memory of Sarah into something ugly. I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to demand answers, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain I was carrying, but instead, I did the only thing I could do. I shut down. Canceling a wedding is expensive. No one tells you that when you're planning one. Thousands of dollars, gone. Deposits for the venue, catering, photographer, non-refundable. It felt like paying a fine for something I didn't even do. But the money wasn't what gutted me. It was the erasing of everything we had built, telling people one by one that it wasn't happening, seeing the pity in their eyes, hearing the awkward silences when they didn't know what to say, watching my parents struggle between their anger towards Sarah and their concern for me. The worst part was the house. We had only lived there for 18 months, still in the phase where it didn't completely feel like home. But we had picked it together, argued over paint colors, talked about how it would be the place where we started a family. Now it was just another thing to dismantle. Sarah agreed to keep paying her share of the mortgage while we sold it. She packed a few bags and moved in with her stepmother, but her presence lingered. Her shampoo was still in the bathroom. Her book still sat on the shelf, pieces of her life mixed with mine, refusing to let me forget. She started coming back occasionally to pick up more things. The first time, I locked myself in my office until she was gone. The second time, I tried to act normal. I failed. Every second of being near her made my skin crawl. She, on the other hand, acted like nothing had happened, like we were just two exes splitting assets. She made casual conversation, commented on the weather, even asked how my week was going. I could barely look at her. My replies were clipped, forced, barely more than a grunt. Every part of me screamed to lash out, to ask her how she could be so indifferent. Instead, I let the silence settle between us. I told myself it was temporary, just until the house was sold. Then, I could walk away for good. Until then, I had nothing to say. I didn't plan on shutting her out completely. It just happened. The first few times Sarah came back to the house, I still answered in one-word responses. Nothing more. But even that felt like too much. Every word I gave her felt like giving her something she didn't deserve, like she was still entitled to my attention. So I stopped. The next time she walked through the door and greeted me, I didn't respond. I didn't even look at her. She asked me how I'd been. Silence. She tried again, laughing awkwardly, as if this was some minor awkwardness between us. I picked up my phone and scrolled through nothing just to avoid her gaze. She didn't get it at first. She kept trying. Did you have a good week? Is work busy? How's everything going? Each question landed in the air, unanswered, until she finally gave up. It wasn't about pettiness. It wasn't about playing games. It was about survival. talking to her, engaging with her, even acknowledging her existence. It hurt. It ripped open wounds that were barely starting to close. She had moved on so easily, changed her hair, bought new clothes, carried herself like someone unbothered. Meanwhile, I was still stuck in the wreckage of what she had done. Every time I saw her, I felt that familiar rage bubble up, along with the sadness, the disbelief, the betrayal. So I kept the silence. It became my armor, my only way to make sure I didn't crack. The only time she heard from me was through WhatsApp, and even then, only about the house. No small talk, no kindness, no closure. She wanted to act like we could be normal, like we could be civil, like she hadn't set everything on fire. I wasn't going to give her that luxury. She kept coming back. Each time she acted as if we were just two people sorting out logistics, as if the past few months were nothing more than an inconvenient bump in the road. She walked through the house like she still belonged there, casually picking up things she had left behind. She flipped through old mail, commented on the weather, even hummed under her breath like she used to, like it was any other normal day. I sat on the couch, phone in hand, pretending she didn't exist. She tried again. "I like what you've done with the place," she said, gesturing to a chair I had moved. Silence. She sighed, but she didn't stop. "Have you seen Jake lately?" she asked, as if his name wouldn't feel like a knife in my gut. I clenched my jaw and focused on the screen in front of me. The worst part wasn't her words, it was how she looked. Different. Her hair was cut shorter, styled in a way she never used to wear it. New clothes, new perfume. A fresh start. She had destroyed everything we built, stepped over the ashes and somehow walked away lighter. Meanwhile, I felt like I was still crawling through the wreckage. I heard her sigh again. "Come on, Adam," she said, a hint of exasperation in her voice. "You can at least talk to me." I didn't even blink. That was when she rolled her eyes. "You're being ridiculous." I gritted my teeth, gripping my phone tighter. My silence wasn't childish. It wasn't immature. It was the only way I could keep myself from saying something I couldn't take back. Because if I started speaking, I wasn't sure I'd ever stop. Every time Sarah walked through the door, it felt like reopening a wound that refused to heal. I had spent weeks, months, trying to stitch my life back together, trying to go to work, trying to sleep, trying to convince myself that one day this wouldn't hurt so much. But every time she came back, I was right back at square one. The worst part? She acted like nothing had changed, like we were two people who had simply drifted apart instead of what we actually were, a liar and the man she betrayed. She still asked me questions, still made offhand comments about things that didn't matter. "How's work? Did you watch the new season of that show we used to love? Have you been going out much?" Like any of that was normal, like she hadn't destroyed everything. I never answered. I never even looked up. But inside, I was screaming. I wanted to ask her how she could do it, how she could just stand there and act like we were fine, how she could speak so casually to me after tearing my life apart. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the pain I felt every single day. But I knew the truth. If she could do what she did and sleep at night, she wouldn't care about my pain. She wouldn't care about my anger. So I held on to my silence. It was the only thing I had left. She could talk all she wanted. She could fill the empty space with as many meaningless words as she liked, but she would never get another piece of me. She had already taken enough. It was only a matter of time before Sarah lost patience. She had tolerated my silence for weeks, maybe thinking I would eventually break, that I would get over it. But one day she finally snapped. I was in the kitchen making coffee when she walked in. She dropped her bag on the counter and let out a loud, frustrated sigh. "Why are you like this?" she asked, arms crossed. I didn't answer. I poured my coffee, kept my focus on the mug in my hands. She let out a humorless laugh. "Seriously, Adam, I just don't get it. You won't even look at me. You won't even say a word. It's been months." I leaned against the counter, scrolling through my phone as if she wasn't even there. She stepped closer. "I don't understand how you can be like this. I mean, I get that you're upset, but this..." She gestured toward me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. "This is just childish." I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. Childish. That word echoed in my head, fueling the fire already burning inside me. I wanted to tell her what was childish, sneaking out in the middle of the night to see someone else, destroying a relationship without a second thought, acting like she had done nothing wrong. I wanted to tell her that the only reason I wasn't speaking was because I didn't trust myself to. Because if I opened my mouth, I didn't know if I'd be able to stop. But I said nothing. Her frustration turned to disbelief. "Wow, okay," she muttered, shaking her head. "I just don't understand you anymore." She grabbed her bag and stormed out, and for the first time in months I felt something close to satisfaction, because if she didn't understand me anymore, good, that meant she no longer had any place in my life. The silence must have gotten to her, because after that day the messages started. At first they were subtle, just a few scattered texts about the house, logistics, deadlines. But then they shifted. "This is ridiculous, Adam. I don't see why you have to act like this. You're being so childish. You're making this harder than it needs to be." Each message more desperate than the last. She wanted a reaction, any reaction. I never gave her one. I read them, processed them, and moved on. The only responses she ever got from me were about selling the house. Short, clipped, emotionless. Anything else I ignored. One night, a longer message came through. "I just don't understand why you're like this now. It's been months. It's not like I killed someone. People break up all the time. We weren't meant to be, and that's okay." I stared at my screen, feeling something sharp twist in my chest. Not meant to be. That's how she framed it. Not as betrayal, not as a deliberate choice to hurt me, but as something inevitable, as if she had no agency in it, as if it just happened. Like she hadn't lied, like she hadn't snuck around for months, like she hadn't ripped my life apart. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I wanted to type something, anything, to remind her of what she did, to throw her words back in her face, to make her understand that I wasn't like this without reason. But then I put my phone down, because no matter what I said, she wouldn't hear me. She never had. The house was finally close to being sold. One more month, maybe less, and it would all be over. No more shared mortgage, no more reason to be in the same space. Sarah came by one last time to collect the last of her things. I knew it was coming, so I prepared for it. I made sure I had nothing to say, nothing to give her. She walked in like she always did, like she still had a right to be there. She moved through the house, packing up stray items she had left behind. A few books, some clothes, a couple of decorations that I hadn't bothered to throw away. I sat in the living room, phone in hand, waiting. She paused in the doorway. "So, I guess this is it," she said, a strange look in her eyes. I didn't answer. She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "You're really not going to say anything?" Silence. "I just don't get you, Adam," she said, almost laughing. But there was frustration beneath it. "You think this makes you stronger? Just shutting down like this?" I clenched my jaw but didn't move. She stared at me, waiting, probably hoping for something. An argument, a fight. One last moment of attention. She wasn't going to get it. After a few more seconds, she scoffed. "Fine, be like that." She picked up her last bag and walked to the door. She hesitated for half a second, like she wanted to say something else, but then she left. I waited until I heard her car start, the sound fading as she drove away. Only then did I let out the breath I'd been holding. I stood, grabbed my keys, and walked out to my own car. I didn't look back. There was nothing left to see. The house was almost empty now. The furniture was either sold or packed, the walls bare, the memories fading into echoes. For the first time in months, I felt something close to peace. Silence had become my refuge. It wasn't just about avoiding her, it was about protecting myself. Every interaction, every word, every forced exchange would have only given her more space in my mind, more power over my emotions. By saying nothing, I took that power back. Some people might call it immature. Maybe it was. But what was the alternative? Screaming at her, demanding answers that would never satisfy me. Letting her off the hook by pretending we could be civil? No. This was the only way I knew how to move forward. I had seen people fall into the trap of holding on to anger, of keeping their exes in their lives just to punish them, to prove how much they had been hurt. That wasn't what I wanted. I didn't want her to know how much she had broken me. I didn't want her to see the damage. I wanted her to face something worse. Nothing. She would never hear my voice again. Never get the chance to defend herself, to explain, to rewrite the narrative in a way that made her feel better. She would never have closure because she didn't deserve it. I wouldn't be a chapter in her story anymore. I would be a blank page, a missing piece, an empty space where something used to be. And when the house was finally sold, when I locked that door for the last time, I would walk away in silence. Because sometimes silence is the loudest thing you can leave behind. So, that's it. That's my story. I've told you everything. The betrayal, the silence, the way I refused to give her even the smallest piece of myself after what she did. And now I have to ask, was I wrong? Because that's what she wanted me to believe. That I was being immature, petty, childish. That I was making things harder than they needed to be. That I was overreacting to something that was just inevitable. But how do you respond to betrayal in a way that isn't messy? How do you act maturely when someone you trusted with your entire life throws it away like it meant nothing? Some people would say, I should have just been civil, that I should have talked to her, let her say whatever it was she wanted to say, given her some kind of closure. But why? Closure is a privilege, not a right. And she lost that right the moment she walked out in the middle of the night to be with someone else. She made her choices. She lived with no consequences. The only thing I had left, the only thing I could control was my silence. Some people might say it was cruel, that ignoring someone completely is just another form of punishment. Maybe they're right. But what would talking have changed? Would it have undone what she did? Would it have made me feel any better? Or would it have just given her one last chance to justify herself? Because I know how those conversations go. I know she would have spun it into something smaller than it was, made excuses, said things like we weren't meant to be or it just happened. And I would have been left standing there, knowing that nothing I said would make her understand the damage she caused. So I ask again, was I wrong? Should I have handled things differently? Should I have given her something more? Should I have let her words in, let her explanations exist? Or was I right to let my silence be the last thing she ever got from me? Because in the end, the rest is silence.